Hi, I'm Jason Duro. I'm an independently published fantasy author, and today I wanted to talk about why I'm independently published instead of traditionally published and trying to get in with one of the big publishing houses. And the first thing I wanted to say is it is a choice. Being self-published or independently published a lot of times can seem to people outside of publishing like it's a fail state, like you aren't good enough to get into traditional publishing, so you just sort of default into self-publishing or indie publishing. And that's not really the way it is. It's that they are both valid paths to getting your books out there, and whichever way you decide to go really just depends on what your own goals and your own skills and strengths and weaknesses are. And so going with indie publishing definitely was a choice for me. I considered going with traditional, and the whole time I was writing my initial book, I kind of assumed that I would go with traditional publishing, that I would try to query an agent, get an agent, and then try to have the agent find an editor and a publisher where my book would be placed, and I would just go down that traditional path like that. But after I did research, I decided that self-publishing was more in line with how I work and what I wanted. And like I said, both paths, traditional publishing and self-publishing, they are both valid. I'm not here to say that traditional publishing is awful. For some people, it is the best path to go. For other people, indie publishing is the best path to go. So you really have to make your own choice. But this video is going to be about why I decided to go with self-publishing and the benefits that I see there. The first thing that I like better about independent publishing is the amount of creative control that I am able to retain for the books and stories and anything that I create that I wouldn't have if I went with traditional publishing. If I had a traditional publisher buy my book, they would have the control to do a lot of things with it that I might not want them to do. For example, I'm able to pick and put together and hire artists and get things to do my own covers. I'm able to have complete creative control over my covers. You can see my cover for my book, AKITHAR'S Greatest Trick, right behind me here, and I'm very proud of that. I did a lot of market research to see what kinds of covers were selling well. I looked at what kinds of covers I like throughout my life and how I wanted to present my book, what I wanted people to think when they see it. And I went through a lot, and I was able to hire a designer that did a really great job with it. And I ended up being just 100% happy with the cover of my book. I would not have that level of creative control if I went with one of the big traditional publishers. They have marketing departments, they have their own designers, they have people who know how to design covers that sell, and they would just do that themselves, and it might work well, it might be a great cover, but it might not be exactly what I would want for my own book. And so by going with self-publishing, I'm able to manage all that myself. It is more money up front that I have to pay out, but I feel like it's worth it to me to be able to have that amount of control. And also on the topic of creative control is the length of the book. I tend to write long. I write epic fantasy. My first book was 170,000 words long. The book that I'm working on right now is, it's currently like 225,000 words, and I'm still going with the first draft. So I write long, and that's not uncommon for epic fantasy writers in particular. But there are certain word ranges that traditional publishers expect and require depending on genre when you submit a book to them. Like, they expect a certain length for a romance book, they expect a certain length for a sci-fi book, for a fantasy book. They have these sort of pigeonholes that you have to go in, and it's especially important that you're within those ranges if you're an early writer, if you're a first-time author just getting into the industry. They want you to fit into what the market expects for those lengths. And if you write shorter than that, if you write longer than that, you're going to have a lot harder time getting them to support you. You're going to get a harder time having traditional publishers want to put your book out there at those unusual lengths for what they expect. When you are self-published or indie published, you can make your book however long you want it. You can have a really short book that you just release as an ebook, and you can even have it printed, and it'll be a really thin book. I have a lot of friends who've done that. They print novellas. You can have really big books like what I write, or even like what the Zodiac Academy authors write, that they have these mammoth books that they publish that it would be hard to push those through. At this point, I'm sure they would have an easy time with traditional publishing, getting big books out. But for me, I don't think that any publisher, any traditional publisher, would have have let me publish my first book at 170,000 words, especially with it being the first book in a proposed series. I would have gotten laughed out of the room. But with independent publishing, I was able to get my book out there, and it's gotten a lot of readers who really enjoy it, who would not have been able to read it otherwise if I had tried to go traditional. And the second thing is kind of connected to that series thing that I mentioned. It's that I have more business control by going with independent publishing than if I had gone traditional publishing. The very first thing that I wanted to write as a first-time author was this mammoth epic fantasy series that I had an idea for, that it's been percolating in my head for a decade or more. It's the AKITHAR'S series, which is what I'm writing right now. If I had come to a traditional publisher saying, hey, I've never been professionally published before, I'm a first-time published author, and I want to write this 9-book epic fantasy series, all the books are going to be huge, and it's going to span this thing, this is my magnum opus coming out of the gate here, that would not have flown, that would not have worked. And if they had picked up the first book, and this is true with any series, not just my huge, ridiculously big epic fantasy series, with any series, if a publisher picks it up and they publish the first book, and that book doesn't sell, if people aren't interested in it and it doesn't take off for some reason, that's pretty much the end of the series in most cases. They will not want to invest the resources into a series that they feel like they won't be able to make a profit on, and that's understandable from a business standpoint. You might get into a situation, though, where you go with a traditional publisher, they publish the first book in your series, and then they say, sorry, we can't market this, we can't do anything with it. And then if you want to write 8 or 10 more books in the series, you're just kind of stuck because that publisher has bought the first book in the series and you want to write the rest of these, but they're not going to publish the rest of them. So maybe you could self-publish the rest of the series. Maybe you could find another publisher, but it's unlikely that you'll find another publisher who will want to start with book 2 and publish forward from there when a competing publisher owns the first book. So it can just be kind of a business mess if you're in traditional publishing and you're trying to do that kind of thing. Another benefit that I see under the business control side of things is that I have control over the formats of my books when they release and which ones come out at what times, and I'm able to just control all of that. I released the ebook, the paperback, and the hardcover of AKITHAR'S Greatest Trick all at the same time. And under traditional publishing, a lot of times the hardcover will come out and then a long time later the paperback will come out, and they have things staggered. And there are a lot of traditional ways that they do things there. And I wanted to give my readers more choice. I wanted for readers to be able to pick up the ebook and the paperback to read as they wanted to. If people wanted the more premium hardcover, they could pick that up at the same time. And so I wanted to get them all out there at the same time, and I was able to do that because I'm independently published and I make all those decisions myself. I also am about to start working on producing audiobooks. I work as a voiceover artist in addition to being a writer, so I'm going to be able to be my own narrator. I'm going to edit it myself and put the audiobook out when I have time, when I want to, and when I'm able and it fits into my schedule. I don't have to work around the schedule of a traditional publisher who might be working with tons of other authors that take a higher priority than I do. And so I am my own big priority. I can do what I want to do when I want to do it. And that feels really good to me as an independently published author. The third big point that I wanted to make is about marketing control. And this is something that a lot of people don't have the right perception about. A lot of people think if you go with traditional publishing that the publisher will handle all the marketing for you, that you don't have to do anything but write the books and get them out there. And that maybe was true in the past to some extent. But these days, if you're traditionally published and you're an early career author, you still have to do just about as much marketing for yourself as you would have to do if you were independently published. You have to do your own social media, you have to get out there and do events for your books, you have to do all kinds of stuff to get people to read and buy your books. And so the idea that going with traditional publishing will save you that marketing effort is kind of a fallacy. And in independent publishing, you have more freedom with that marketing than you would with traditional publishing because you're only answerable to yourself and your own brand. You're not answerable to a corporation that you are now a part of because you've sold your book into it. And also along those lines, with regards to marketing, when you're independently published, you can set and change your book prices, the various versions of them, all the different kinds of books that you have out, the audiobooks, paperbacks, all that. You can set and change the prices pretty much whenever you want to, and you can run promotions, you can run specials and different things like that. According to what you see and what you observe by the data works best for you. You don't have to coordinate it with a publisher or with a marketing department at a publisher. publisher that might have different ideas or different priorities. If you want to try setting your book to 99 cents for a week and just see how that goes, you can do that. It might work, it might not, but you're free to experiment. And you wouldn't be free to do that if your book is priced and published by a traditional publisher. So I really like having that freedom, and I have done things like that in the past where I just sort of experiment. For a few days, I'll change the price of the ebook to be something else, or I will run a special promotion in a paid newsletter that will send people into the book. And it's easier to do that by far as an independent publisher than it would be if I had gone the traditional route. And now the fourth thing that I want to talk about is the thing that a lot of people, when they don't really know a lot about self-publishing, they think this is the only reason that people want to go with self-publishing as opposed to traditional, and that is to avoid the gatekeeping that's in traditional publishing. In order to get published traditionally, you typically have to query your manuscript out to agents for a long time, finally find an agent who feels like they have enough confidence in your book to sell it to a publisher. Then you have to wait through the whole process while the agent finds an editor at a publishing house who wants your book and is interested in it. You go through all that process, you go through tons of rejection, you go through this whole cycle, and it's kind of a miserable thing for most people. Most people do not hit it just right away. Some people do, some people get very fortunate, very lucky with it, but most people don't. And the thing that's important to know is rejections of manuscripts, rejections from agents or from editors or publishers or whoever, a lot of times it's not a reflection on the quality of the book or even the saleability of the book in general. It often has to do with the personal tastes of the person that is looking at the book at that time, or with whatever they have recently bought. They may have, if you're selling a cozy mystery to them, they may have just bought another book that is somewhat similar to yours, and so they don't want to be working with two of the same kind of book at the same time. Or it could be that they just don't handle a really long book like the kind that you've sent to them. It could just be that the specs of your book do not fit within whatever niche they are working in. It doesn't have to have anything to do with the quality of the book itself. And there are a lot of really great books that end up never being published and never getting read just because they get turned down by individuals and then the authors don't follow up in any other way to try to get it published. I think that's a huge shame, and I am really glad that I don't have to deal with the kind of gatekeeping that traditional publishing has. I know it's necessary to have that because you can't, in traditional publishing, just accept everything. You can't invest a company's resources in just every book that somebody sends to you. So the gatekeepers have to be there for traditional publishing. They don't have to be there for independent publishing because you are your own advocate. You are the one putting up the resources to publish your books. You're the one that's behind it, and you don't have all those other priorities for other authors. So that's another reason why I went with self-publishing as opposed to traditional publishing. And like I said, a lot of people think that this is the one reason, that you just feel like you won't get accepted by traditional publishing, so you just fail down into self-publishing. And of course, as I'm talking about here, that's not the truth, but it is a very valid reason to go with independent publishing. And now the fifth reason that I want to talk about why I went myself with independent publishing instead of traditional publishing is money. Pretty much everybody who wants to publish their books and get their works out there wants people to read their books, and they also want to get some kind of monetary compensation for it. I definitely want to be able to make a full-time living as an author and to be able to just write and have people enjoy my books and for me to get paid enough to pay my bills and just focus on that as my full-time work. And the way that compensation works in traditional publishing versus independent publishing is pretty different. Both of them revolve around royalties, both of them have to do with that. But in traditional publishing, typically the author will get paid an advance, which is a lump sum of money the publisher will give to the author at the beginning. And the author will have that money, and then the book starts selling after the publisher puts it out. And when the book starts selling, there is a certain percentage of each sale that the author will get as a royalty. And it will be just this specific percent amount that, depending on the format of the book, if it's a paperback or hardcover or ebook or whatever, that's the royalty that the author gets. And if the author has gotten an advance from the publisher, the royalties that they make go towards that advance. They go towards paying through that advance until the advance is paid off. So that means the author gets the advance at the beginning, and then they don't receive any royalties until however long it takes for them to pay off that advance. The royalties go directly toward the advance, so the publisher just collects those royalties until they get through that amount. And in some cases, it's very hard for the author to get through the advance for them to earn enough royalties, because the royalties in traditional publishing tend to be pretty small. So you have to sell a ton of books to get through a sizable advance. Now, of course, advances are not as big these days for authors as they were in the past, especially for early career authors and first-time authors. But it's still the same structure. You get paid in advance, and then you're expected to sell enough copies of the book to earn enough royalties that the royalties will pay off that advance, and then after that time, the author starts getting the advance payments coming in. It's different in independent publishing. With independent publishing, you don't have a publisher paying you in advance up front. In fact, you pay for everything yourself up front. You pay for the editing of your book, the cover, the formatting, any expenses that you have, you manage all that yourself. And then when you start selling the book, you start collecting the royalties yourself immediately. You don't have to wait until you pay through the advance to do that. And that's more appealing to me. Some authors prefer to get the advance. Some authors like to have that lump sum up front. But I prefer to just get the royalties as they come and not to have to worry about paying through that advance. And another thing about money that is even more significant about traditional publishing versus independent publishing is the difference in the percentage that you get as that royalty. When you are traditionally published, and we're just going to talk about ebooks here because there's a lot of variability with print books because there's a lot of variation in the print process. There's a lot of variability in the number of pages that affect it. So we're just going to talk about ebooks here. But with traditional publishing, it's very common to have royalties of 10 to 25%. That if a book sells, let's say a book sells for $10, the author will maybe get $1 to $2.50 on that sale. Whereas in independent publishing, I get 70% of the sale of each book as my royalty. So if I sell a $10 ebook, for example, I would get $7 of that. So obviously 70% against 10 to 25% is a huge difference. And I'm just using $10 as sort of a benchmark there. That's not how much I actually charge for my ebooks. A lot of people charge more, a lot charge less, but that's just easier for me to talk about here for illustrative purposes. And the reason that I get 70% is my ebooks are exclusive through Kindle Select. They're exclusive to Amazon, and they are in Kindle Unlimited, which is like Amazon's Netflix service for books. And if you are in that service and you price your book within a certain range, which is what most ebooks end up being priced, especially indie published ones, then you'll get 70% of every book sale. It comes back to you. And so the royalties that I make on each book, each individual book that I sell, are much higher through independent publishing than I would get for each independent ebook selling through traditional publishing. So in the long run, if you have a lot of books out there and you promote yourself really well, you get really good sales, there is a lot more room for easier advancement in independent publishing as far as your income than there is in traditional publishing. I have a lot of personal friends who are independently published and a lot who are traditionally published. I don't know anyone personally who is a close personal friend of mine who is traditionally published and makes enough money doing that that's their only job. All of them do other things to make money, whether it's teaching, working a day job, doing other stuff. Of the people I know who are independent authors, a lot of them, that's their whole job. They make enough money just selling their books that they don't have to do anything else. They pay all the bills that way, and it's sufficient. So there is a pretty sizable money gap there in traditional versus independent, depending on how things play out and how you work it. But I feel like there's more room for growth and more potential for advancement in independent publishing than there is in traditional. So those are the reasons why I decided to go with independent publishing as opposed to traditional publishing. Different people have different priorities. Different people have different goals and skills and interests. People who don't want to manage their own business, people who want to just write and market for themselves and then let someone else handle the editing, handle the covers and all of that. Maybe traditional would be better for them. But for me personally, independent is the way to go, and these are the reasons that I did that. So I would love to hear from you if you have made the choice to go independently published or traditionally published and why you chose to go one way or the other. Drop your comments down below and like this video and make sure to subscribe so you'll see all my upcoming videos.